Welcome back to our AZ-500 study series. Today we will be discussing identity protection. So still part of Manage Azure Active Directory Identities, we will be learning how we can secure access by using Azure AD and then configure access reviews, implement conditional access including MFA, configure Azure AD identity protection. That's going to be the main topic of this episode. And then later on our demo, on our lab, we will be learning how to deploy and configure identity protection, configure MFA, conditional access policies, and then the actual access review process. So yeah, without further ado, let's now move into identity protections. So identity protection is a tool that allows organizations to perform these three key tasks. First of them is automate the detection and remediation of identity-based risks. The keyword there is identity-based risk. Investigate risks using the data in the portal, and then export risk detection data to third-party utilities for further analysis. Right, so how does identity protection works? According to Microsoft, they analyze 6.5 trillion signals per day to identify and protect their customers from threats. So Microsoft actually used Azure AD data to analyze these trillions of signals. Signals means the activities within Azure AD. That when they provide identity services, they are also collecting data in order to form this identity protection tool. So how does identity protection works? It works on risk detections. Then once they collect these activities and then they detect a risk, they will then flag it and they will send a signal or log it. Then once you have this now on your organization, it can then be further fed into a security information and event management tools. That's SIEM, if you've heard that before. So then you can investigate further on what's going on. So that's the very basic of how identity protection works. So it detects first and then it sends the signal to be fed into a SIEM tools or other third-party tools. So where can you see these risk detections? These risk detections can be seen in Azure AD reporting. That's the native Azure AD reporting page. And on the Azure AD identity protection page itself. Those are the main places where you can check risk detections. If you are a more advanced user, you could also use the Azure Identity Protection API via MS Graph. So on the exam, they won't expect you to know the codes or the scripts in order to use Identity Protection API, but it's important to know that you can also use this tool or feature in order to view risk detections. Right, so currently identity protection detects 6 types of risks. let me just clear my screen here. Risk detections. Oh, I can't spell that correctly. So risk detection types. So the first type of risk detection is users with leaked credentials. So this is when user's password has been compromised and then distributed into the to the online world, into the internet, available to hackers. My Azure AD identity protection can detect that. So that's in other words, compromised passwords. The next type is sign in from anonymous IP addresses. So these are type of identities where users who have successfully signed in from an IP address that has been identified as an anonymous IP address. The third type is impossible travel to a typical location. So this risk detection type identifies two sign-ins originating from geographically distant locations where at least one of the locations may also be atypical for user given past behavior. So let's say the user is a London-based user. So for several years, he or she has been logging in a London-based location, but then suddenly one day they got a a login attempt originating from China. So that will then trigger this type of detection, impossible travel. Fourth one is sign-ins from infected devices. So that's pretty straightforward. Azure AD can detect sign-in from infected device. This is actually gets done in help with Defender ATP or Intune management, mobile device management. So they can detect the infected devices. Fifth type is sign in from unfamiliar locations. So these are the type of detections which considers past sign-in locations such as IP address to determine a new or unfamiliar locations. This kind of work with this impossible travel to a typical location. And lastly, sixth is the sign-ins from IP addresses with suspicious activities. So these are type of detections which identifies IP addresses with a high number of failed sign-in attempts across multiple user accounts over a short period of time. So this is typically like a kind of a brute force attack where a hacker tries to authenticate using multiple user accounts, but originating in a one IP address. So that's going to be a risk detection. So you do have these 6 types of risk detections when you use identity protection, but the insights that you will get or the informations that you will get from these detections will depend on the license that your AD subscription have. So if you do have the AD Premium P2, you will all get these informations from risk detections. But if you do have P1, you may not get some of these advanced detections, such as the unfamiliar sign-in. So that's considered as an advanced detection. You won't get that if you do have a P1 license. So in with these detection types, the identity protection will come up with a risky users list. So I will show that later to you in Azure portal where that risky users list is. So from here, it will then give you details on the risk, the history of all risky sign-ins, and then the history of the risk itself. So let's say today it's been a leaked credentials, and then suddenly next day it became a sign in from unfamiliar location. You will then see that on the risky users report. So within identity protection, you could set these 3 default policy to help you implement or enforce a more secure access to your organization. So first here is the sign-in risk policy. Then you do have Azure multi-factor authentication, then conditional access policy. So let's start with sign-in policy. So sign-in risk, as the name suggests, it represents the probability that a given authentication request isn't authorized by the identity owner. So it actually works with a signal from identity protection. Then it will then give they call it a risk score about that detection, and finally an action from the administrator. So risk score could be high, medium, or low. Now once it's been given a score, it will then be up to us, to administrators, what action should we do. So you could either block, allow, or allow but register to MFA. So this third option here, you could use this to enable new users in your organization to register to MFA. So at first they will be blocked or allowed, but then they do have to register with MFA. You could also use location here, and then client apps. So locations, that's something you can set within your organization. It could be IP ranges that you can set. Let's say you do have multiple offices, you could set multiple locations as a trusted location. And then client apps, that's let's say that's the M365 Office apps. So you could say this can only be set on Outlook apps. So that's gonna be specific to Outlook, but not in Word. So yeah. So when a risky sign-in has been detected, the administrators can also confirm the compromise or confirm sign-in safe. Yeah, so that's sign-in risk policy. It do look like a conditional access, but it's different. I'll show you later on why they are different. So let me just clear my board here. Next is Azure Multi-Factor Authentication, or MFA. So MFA provides additional security by requiring a second form of authentication to deliver strong authentication to a range of easy-to-use authentication methods. So MFA, it runs on three authentication methods, like categories of authentication methods. So they name it as something you know, something you have, and something you are. So something you know, it's typically a password. They also I think this is like the first factor authentication. And then something you have, it could be your mobile phone or your authentication token in a form of a USB or a FIDO. And then something you are, it's usually a biometrics factor. You use this, I think, on your everyday mobile device, fingerprint, facial recognition. Yeah, so those are the three main categories or factors that Azure MFA can use in order to provide this another layer of authentication security in Azure AD. You may be asked in the examination, what are the features of Azure MFA? So Azure MFA can be deployed on-premise and in Azure. So there's a flexibility in there with Azure MFA. It can also be used on third-party applications such as Salesforce or other applications, but obviously you have to contact your application provider if they support Azure MFA. Then third feature that you do have with MFA is that admin accounts in Azure AD does not need a license in order to enable MFA. Even you don't have the Azure P1, P2 license in your subscription, your admin accounts will automatically have the MFA feature enabled on them with no additional cost. With MFA, you can set additional settings to further the security, to toughen it. Let me just clear my screen here. Additional settings that you can set with MFA. First, here is the account lockout. So here you could set a trigger to before a user account gets locked out. Let's say 5 multiple attempts or failed attempts using MFA. It will then trigger the account lockout on that certain user account, and then you could also set the reset timer for that lockout to be lifted. Other setting you can set is block or unblock users. This is when a user lost their mobile phone where their MFA has been set up. You can then block that user account associated to that mobile phone, and then just unblock it once they have registered a new device for authentication. There's also fraud alert. So this is the ability for the users to be able to report frauds to the administrators. So let's say you get a notification but you're not doing anything, you think it's not you that's trying to sign in using your account, you can always report it to your administrators using the app. So that's the Microsoft Authenticator application or a code. Usually when you authenticate your MFA by phone call, so you just press the hash key to approve that sign in. But with the code, to report that fraud, you have to add a code before the hash. So let's say a 0, that's the default. You can always change that in Azure AD portal. So when the user enters 0, then hash, it will report in a form of an email alert, which is an additional setting of MFA to your administrators. Another thing is the OAuth tokens. So these are I've mentioned a FIDO device or a USB dongle, which have these codes that displayed and then refreshes every 30 to 60 seconds. That's the OAuth tokens. And then you do have the trusted IP ranges as well. So this is to allow federated users or IP ranges to bypass two-step authentication. So that's used for bypass. With these additional settings, you must have your users must have this authentication set up under MFA setup. First authentication option is call to phone. So that's pretty straightforward. When you sign in, Microsoft will trigger a phone call. You have to answer. Sometimes you just need to answer it, and then it will authenticate you. Sometimes it will ask you to press the hash key to authenticate. Another option is the text message, SMS. So Microsoft will send you a code in order for you to enter to your sign-in screen to authenticate your login. Then there's the notification from app. So when you do have this Microsoft Authenticator app installed on your device, when you sign in, you'll get a notification to approve or deny that login. Lastly, you do have this verification code where you can get actually on the USB dongle or from the application itself. Conditional access. So what is conditional access? It's a tool by Azure Active Directory to bring signals together to make decisions and enforce organizational policies. So this is more of an automation. So I mentioned earlier, it's with the sign-in risk policy, it works on signals, then the risk score, and then action. But in conditional access policies, it uses multiple signals, then conditions, which includes actually it may include risk score. If you combine sign-in risk policy, then you enforce a policy. So instead of the administrator taking action manually, it can enforce a policy by itself. It depends on how are you going to set up the conditional access. Conditional access policies are enforced after the first factor authentication has been completed. So after you enter the password, and then it's successfully signed in, it will then go to to run your conditions with conditional access. So if the conditions are not met, that sign in will be denied or won't be authenticated. Now these are the default identity protection policies that you can set in order to implement secure access to your organization. Okay, so we are now here in our Azure AD portal. Go into your portal, then on the left side you're gonna see that security tab there. Just click on that and it will actually direct you to the getting started page, where under protect category you're gonna see the identity protection tab. Just click on that and you will see the dashboard on all these risky sign-in detections. So currently I don't have any on my Azure lab, but it's something you can, if you are currently working on a production Active Directory, you're gonna see some detections here. So on the left side under reporting, here you can see the risky users report, where you can check who are the risky users in your organization basing on the detections by identity protection. If you want to check all the detections, go to the risk detections here, where you can see a more detailed information about that detection. Now on a user risk policy, you can set here the assignments. So usually if you want to set it to everyone, you can do that, but best practice is to exclude an account. It's called a break glass account. It could be an administrator account, which you can use in order to to access Azure AD, even everyone gets blocked. So it's just like a safety kind of protocol. So you can either select individuals or an Azure AD group. So I'm gonna try that one. Just select that. Now based on the user risk score here, it actually allows you to select. So let's say that user, if that user gets a detection of let's say a medium score detection, you will now then do this. So you can either block access or allow access, but require password change. Right? So that's how you do that. So done. And then enforce policy, you've got the trigger there. So I'm just going to set that to off because I don't need that at the moment. So I'm just going to save that. Now you do have the sign-in risk remediation policies here as well. Same thing. You can select an individual user or a group. I'm just going to set that hot and one group here. Select that. So configure the risk levels. Same thing with the user risk policy. And then you can either block or allow access, but require multiple factor authentication. Click done on that. I'm going to leave that to off because I don't need that at the moment. So under protect, still under protect category, you can set the MFA registration policy. So usually you set it to everyone here, or select a group where because normally in Azure AD you have service accounts as well, and sometimes those service accounts it doesn't work sometimes when you use it in a code or in a script if it gets prompted with MFA. So you can exclude that here using a group, an AD group, or just select all users here. So those are the identity protection policies that you can set up within the identity protection page. So going back to the security page, you can see here conditional access under protect. So if you click on conditional access, so under conditional access on the left tab you can see policies there, and here is where you can create that conditional access policy. So I'm just going to create a policy from scratch. You can also create from a template, but for the sake of this demo, we're just gonna create it from scratch. So conditional access AZ-500. Alright, so here the first option you will get is the users or workload identities. So bit similar with sign-in risk policies, you can set an individual, set it to all users, set it to a group, and you do have an additional option here. Directory roles here is where you can select, let's say, all the global administrators, all the global readers will be affected by this conditional access. So that's an advanced option here. You can do all guests and external users as well. So I'm just gonna select all users for now. So you see that it's like a warning message that if you select all users, you always need to exclude one. It will be your break loss account again. So let me just actually select a user here. Yeah, let's select that one. That's my test account, by the way. And your next option will be the application or actions. So if I do select apps here, you're gonna see like most of the Microsoft supported apps. Let's say Office 365, but obviously you can select other applications here as well. So just select that. You can also base this category in user action. So register or join device. So if that device is registered in Azure AD or it's joined in Azure AD, it will be affected by this conditional access. So I'm just gonna leave it to Cloud Apps. Now the next option you will get is the condition. So user risk must be so let's say it must be low, done. User risk must be no risk. You see that? So this is a very, it's quite dangerous, so be careful when setting up these options in conditional access, because it's quite impossible for a user to have no risk in sign-in, because sometimes we kind of log in multiple times in a day and it can get flagged as a low risk by Azure AD. So be careful with this one. So it's the level that this policy will apply to. So it will apply to, let's say, high risk only. Now you can actually skip some of these options. If you want to, you can set it all of it. Now on the access controls, I'm not gonna set the filtered devices and other stuff. This is now the action. So what do you want Azure AD to do? So would you want them to block it straight away or grant access but require MFA? So for me, this is the most the safest option here, to allow them but require MFA. But depending on what you are trying to set, let's say it could be a conditional access for a high risk sign-ins, you could be a bit more strict in here. Required a, like this one, required a Azure AD joint device, or the device must be compliant. Now for multiple controls, you can either say it requires everything that you set here. Let's say you have those 3, it should met these 3 requirements here, or just 1 if you set it to require 1 of the selected controls only. Alright, so I'm just gonna set 1 there, select session. So that's the control based on session controls for specific cloud applications. I don't usually set this one, but if you do need it, just that's the place where you can set that. Now on enforcing conditional access, you can do report only, on or off. So report only, it's best practice to report only first to audit what it is being filtered, what's being blocked, or what it is doing in the background. And then once you're confident that it's actually just filtering those sign-ins that are what you want it to control, then you can turn it on. So that's how you create conditional access in Azure AD. And when you go back to Security tab, you're gonna see here MFA under Manage. Now once you get MFA enabled, you can then set the additional MFA settings here, such as the account lockout. So you can set a number here, let's say 5, and then the minutes before it gets reset, I'm gonna say 300 minutes. That's quite long, but yeah. So it can also be set before it unblocks the account, so I'm gonna set it to 50 minutes. Alright, now under I'm just gonna discard that. You can also block and unblock users here. So as we have mentioned, if they lost their device, you can do it here. Fraud alert, fraud alert. So just turn that on, and then you can set what code needs to be entered by the user in order to report that fraud. Alright, and also here you can automatically block the user who reports a fraud. Another thing is the notification. You just have to enter the recipient email address. This is usually your service desk email address to report the fraud alerts. So going back here in the Azure AD portal, another feature of identity protection is access reviews. It enables organizations to efficiently manage group memberships, access to enterprise locations, and role assignments. So these are actually important to actually have the visibility of who have access to your resources. Now to do that, it's actually in a different tab here in your Azure AD portal. It's under Identity Governance here, and then Access Reviews. Within here, you can just create new access review here and then select what to review. So usually just create a group, select a group, let's say London office group, select that. Now the scope is you can either just review guest users only or all users. Let's just set that to all users. So on the next page, it will there's a new preview option here. Just select that. Let's see, 3 stages. Okay, so you can set stages on the review. So let's say you got first reviewer, the group owner. You can also set a fallback reviewer. Let's say the group owner is not available, or let's say didn't do the review. You can set a fallback user there to do the review. The stage of the duration, so stage duration, so that's how long that stage will run, and then after that duration, it will then go to second stage. So second stage, it could be the managers. So that's how you can set who can review this. So for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to select group owner here, and then a fallback user. Duration 6 days, and that's going to be a monthly review. End date, I'm not gonna select end date, just select next there. So upon completion, you can do here no change or remove access, but yeah, let's leave it to no change so they can actually do the changes manually. Now let's create review name AZ-500 review, and there you go. You got your access review set for your organization. So thank you for watching. See you on the next one.